Welcome to the weekly update, where we go in depth with a particular topic. And joining me today is workplace relations consultant Sharlini Jayadeva. Welcome, Sharlini.
Hi, Daniel.
So, Sharlini, you've done a podcast before. Prior to disclosing or commencing the podcast, we share a clue for our listeners. So I'm going to put that on screen for you now.
Okay, so I can see we've got the Avengers on screen.
We do. So we have a picture of the Marvel movie, The Avengers, and based on that clue, what would you say is the topic for this week's podcast?
Superheroes.
Superheroes. I'm going to go with that. I think that's great. It's close. So superheroes do protect people. And there is a new Marvel movie coming out. Some people may not know this. I do have the inside rail to my friends out in Hollywood. The next Marvel movie will be Protecting Worker Entitlements. And today's podcast is around the changes to the Fair Work Act, which come about from the passing of the Fair Work legislation amendment, Protecting Worker Entitlements.
Perfect. So I understand it would assist members if they had a copy of the recent Fair Work Ombudsman advice before them when listening or watching.
That's correct. So the Fair Work Ombudsman recently updated their advice on the changes associated with the Fair Work legislation amendment around protecting worker entitlements, and a link we've provided on screen.
So while members access the link, can you take us through an overview of the changes?
So on June 2023, the Australian government passed the Fair Work legislation amendment Protecting Worker Entitlements Act 2023. And what that legislation does is it makes some changes to the Fair Work Act, and it covers the following topics, which we'll place on screen. So it addresses changes to unpaid parental leave. It provides for protection for migrant workers, superannuation in the national employment standards, and employee authorised deductions.
When do these take effect?
So these changes have different start dates. So some took effect from 1 July 2023, others start later this year, and some start in early 2024.
It seems sensible to start with the changes that took effect from 1st of July 2023.
I agree. So the first change that took effect from 1 July 2023 were changes to unpaid parental leave.
Let's unpack the unpaid parental leave change further.
Yeah, so what this change does is it improves access to unpaid parental leave and enables families to share work and caregiving responsibilities. We're going to put on screen what these changes entail. So firstly, flexible unpaid parental leave, and that's an amendment to the quantum. And what that means is employees taking unpaid parental leave will be able to take up to 100 days of their 12-month leave entitlement flexibly during the 24-month period after the birth or placement of their child. This is an increase from the previous 30-day entitlement. Secondly, it's a change around flexible unpaid parental leave and when it can be taken. So employees can take flexible leave before and after continuous unpaid parental leave, and pregnant employees are entitled to flexible leave up to 6 weeks before the birth. Thirdly, concurrent parental leave. So employees will no longer be prevented from taking more than 8 weeks of unpaid parental leave at the same time as their spouse or de facto partner. And finally, the amount of leave. So both the parents will be able to take up to 12 months of unpaid parental leave at any time within 24 months of the child's birth or placement. They can also apply for an extension of up to 12 months beyond the initial 12-month leave amount. What it is important to note is that employees must still comply with the notice requirements in the Fair Work Act when taking flexible unpaid parental leave.
How do these changes affect existing enterprise agreements?
It's a good question. These changes do take precedent over existing enterprise agreement terms. It's important to note that because these are changes to the Act and these are changes to National Employment Standard terms. But the Fair Work Act does not confer paid parental leave entitlements. So these changes are limited to unpaid parental leave entitlements and should have a minor effect or a very limited effect on the taking of unpaid parental leave by employees.
That takes us to the next change, which operated from the 1st of July 2023, which is protection for migrant workers. Can you summarise these changes?
So there's a new provision in the Fair Work Act that addresses the interactions between the Act and the Migration Act 1958. Specifically, it ensures, and we'll provide these dot points on screen, that migrant workers continue to have their rights and entitlements under the Fair Work Act, regardless of their migration status under the Migration Act. And the breach of the Migration Act doesn't affect the validity of an employment contract or a contract for services.
Does this mean the amendment ensures that migrants are entitled to benefits under the Fair Work Act regardless of their immigration status?
That's correct. We're confident, though, that these changes would impact a phenomenally small proportion of employees in the sector, if any.
I understand the next change dealing with authorised employee deductions take effect later this year.
That's correct. So from the 30th of December 2023, employers will be able to authorise salary deductions made by their employer that are either recurring or for amounts that vary from time to time.
What does this mean in practical terms?
So in practical terms, this means an employer can make a single written authorisation that allows their employer to deduct amounts from their salary, even where the deduction amount may vary from year to year. It can be withdrawn by the employee in writing at any time.
How is this different to the current arrangements?
So the current arrangements require a new written authorisation where a deduction amount changes. Employees can also continue to allow deductions for specific amounts only, and these deductions need to be principally for the employee's benefit and in writing.
The final change is effective from 1st of January 2024 and involves incorporation of the superannuation into the National Employment Standards.
That's correct. And this means that unpaid or underpaid superannuation can be enforced under the Fair Work Act by more employees, as well as by an employee organisation such as a union or by the Fair Work Ombudsman directly.
How does this interact with existing obligations to pay superannuation contributions?
So employers already have an obligation to pay superannuation contributions for eligible employees under superannuation guarantee laws. And most of these, and actually all of these, are provided for in our public sector and community health enterprise agreements. There would be no contravention of the National Employment Standards provision, however, where an employer has met their obligations under the superannuation guarantee laws.
What will the role of the Australian Taxation Office be?
So the ATO will continue to have main responsibility for ensuring compliance with the employer obligations under the superannuation guarantee laws.
So, an employee who asserts that they have been unpaid or underpaid superannuation can have their complaint investigated by either the ATO or Fair Work Ombudsman.
That's correct. However, the change does stipulate that employees cannot use the new NES entitlements to recover unpaid superannuation or underpaid superannuation through the courts if the ATO has already commenced legal proceedings around that unpaid or underpaid superannuation.
Are there any minor changes members may need to be aware of?
There have been some additional changes around the Fair Work Commission being granted powers from 1 July 2023 to make a workplace determination that sets terms and conditions of employment that replace enterprise agreements in some circumstances. The circumstances, however, within which this would arise are unlikely to affect any VHIA member.
Thanks, Daniel, for taking us through the changes to the Fair Work Act from the recent passing of the Fair Work Legislation Amendment Protecting Worker Entitlements Act 2023.
Thank you, Sharlini.
VHIA.com.